I remember being about 6 or 7 years old when I started hearing, you need to be a good girl. Indian girls don't do that. I started taking that on. I started believing it. And that carried all the way into adulthood. I didn't know it then, but that moment, those moments were the beginning of my education in becoming small, learning that my natural joy, my authentic voice, was somehow too much for this world to handle. I'd be a typical child. I'd be playing, I'd be laughing. And here I was being told, shh, behave yourself. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was literally being a child. And all these rules started to pile up one on top of the other. And with the premise, Indian girls don't do that. Indian girls don't do that. So I had this sense of terminal uniqueness, as my coach often calls it, that, oh, I'm an Indian girl, so therefore I don't do this, I can't do this, I can't think this. And it took its toll. If you've ever felt like you're living your life with the volume turned down, this episode is for you. Hey, beautiful souls. I'm Priya, and I help women find their voice and step into their power in relationships, especially after 40, especially if you're in perimenopause, menopause. But here's what I don't talk about. I wasn't born with confidence. I was not born with the ability to stand here in front of a screen and put this on YouTube and not know who's going to see this. I wasn't raised to speak up. On the contrary, I was raised to be quiet. I was raised to blend in, to be agreeable, to be what my culture, my family, my community needed to be. Today, we're diving deep into something that affects so many of us, but we rarely name it: cultural conditioning. And this is for my Asian Indian women out there. Now, I can't speak to any other cultures because I'm Asian Indian. I can speak to being an Asian Indian woman being raised outside of India and how that still will affect you. You think, okay, well, you're being raised in America, so therefore you're going to have more freedom. You're going to have more space to breathe and think and develop your own ideas. That's not the case. We're going to talk about how we're taught from birth who it's safe to be. And here's the thing, we're not born silent. Think about how we're born. We come in screaming into this world. We're not born people pleasers. We learn these patterns as survival mechanisms. If you've ever wondered why it feels so scary to speak your truth, why setting boundaries feels like you're betraying everyone you love, that you're being a bad girl, or why you sometimes don't even know what your real opinion is on things, stay with me. I need to give you some context about where I come from because cultural conditioning, as I said, isn't one size fits all. So I'm South Indian. Specifically, my family's from Tamil Nadu. And my parents were raised in Delhi, so North India. Even though I wasn't raised in India, in my home, it was India. When I walked into my home, it was India. And the community that I was around when I walked into each of their homes, these Indian families, because we had a small community that we would gather with, we would do religious ceremonies with, it was India. Tamil Nadu has some very specific ideas about how women should move through the world. I mean, we're talking conservative, religious, Hindu culture. And the rules for girls, they were crystal clear, even if they were never written down. I'm going to go over some of those rules. The good girl Tamil playbook looked like this: get good grades. Education is important, but remember, you're preparing to be a good wife and mother. That was never explicitly stated, it was implicitly understood. Coming from my grandparents, be modest in dress, in speech, in ambition. Don't be too much. Don't draw attention to yourself. I grew up in the 80s and think about 80s fashion. I love that stuff. But I remember being told, don't wear that. It's too provocative. And it was not provocative. It was just not accepted. I remember being policed at such a young age. The next one, which is a great rule to live by: respect your elders. I still do to today. I respect everyone, but respect your elders. And definitely, I had this reverence for my grandparents and the older people in my family. But the underlying meaning behind this was never question authority. even when authority was wrong, even when it hurt you. So I remember speaking up with family in India and getting in trouble for that, even though what they did was hurtful. See a pattern in the stuff that I've been talking about finding your voice in relationships. Here's one that hits home. Marriage and children are your ultimate purpose, and everything else is just extra. I went to India to, my grandparents had retired, moved to a temple village for in Tamil Nadu. And my mom and I were going to a woman's house to pick up some food for my grandmother. Here I'm single. Now, I've never been married. I don't have kids. And the woman, she was a priest's wife. And what she said to me is, the reason you are here on earth for procreation. She literally said that to me. That is your purpose here on earth. I watched people all around me with degrees and dreams reduce themselves to conversations about whose daughter was getting married when. Let's not get into dowry. And it was conversations around marriage, baby, and possibly where are you living? What's your house look like? Those are the conversations that I was being surrounded with at such an early age. There was this hidden energy in the air, like, don't bring shame to the family name. And that was a big one. Every choice that I made was filtered through, what will people say? These mythical people who were apparently always watching, always judging. What are they going to say? God forbid they find out that I cut my hair short. There were rules around my appearance. Now, I grew up here, so I had an 80s hairstyle. But as I got older and I still continued with being Americanized and went to India, I was disrespected for not looking Indian enough. I even went into a Hindu temple. Now, mind you, I don't speak Tamil fluently, but I can speak it enough to get what I need done if I went to visit in India. I went into a temple and they said, sorry, you're not allowed in, only Hindus. And I said, I am from Tamil, and I said it in my language. They didn't believe me because of my skin color, because my hair was short, because I didn't look the role. Here's what happened. I became a master at reading rooms. I could sense exactly what version of myself would be acceptable in any given moment. You meet me now, there is only one version of me. I speak the same way, whether it's professionally, friends, family. And as far as my appearance, as far as how I carry myself, I'm the same version. But growing up, there were multiple versions of me. How I had to be with even within families. So if we were going to one family's house and they were Indian, there was that version of me. Now there was another version of me in another family's house. Think about how confusing this is for a child. I could sense exactly what version of myself would be the most acceptable. I learned to be quiet. I learned to be helpful in the kitchen. I learned to go and serve. Agreeable when adults were talking about my future. Oh, and Priya gets married. Oh, and Priya does this. Oh, and Priya has kids. The irony is later on in life, after college, I went and lived in Japan for 3 years. And that was pretty patriarchal society. And I found myself in that same dynamic naturally. It was like second nature, serving tea to the men while they sat down and dimming myself. And here's what nobody talks about. This constant shape shifting is exhausting. Somewhere along the way, I lost track of who I actually was underneath all these performances. And I was being an actress in my own life and just didn't know which character I had to be. And there's this moment that happens when you're constantly adapting yourself to fit what others need. You start to disconnect from your own inner voice. It's like there's two versions of you, or maybe even more. The public that loves and approves of you, and then this other you. The one with opinions and desires and dreams that don't fit the mold. I remember being in high school and having a crush on someone in school. And I got in trouble for that because Indian girls don't do that. That's what I was fed. And I don't fault my parents. They did the best they could given what they had been given. They, got married through an arranged marriage. They lived in India, then moved to the UK and then to the US. And they were functioning off of, or they were parenting off of what they knew and how they were parented. And they knew that relationships, boyfriends, girlfriends. You just don't do that. What was set up in the dynamic in my entire family unit is that's something you don't even have boyfriends and girlfriends. You get married, and that's going to be done through an arrangement. And you need to go to school. Then, after school, then it will be decided for you if you are ready to get married or not. I remember once my family found out about this crush because I was passing notes. I felt this absolute fear inside that, oh my God, I cannot believe I did this. It was as if I committed such a crime. And all it was a natural crush. You want to talk about midlife and 40 and hormones? Talk about what's happening when you're a teenager. I think we can say what's happening to your body and hormones, especially now you're around 16. Your body is you're having your period and your body is essentially preparing you for childbirth. The emotional toll of this is something we don't talk about enough. I've talked about it plenty with my cousin. I grew up with her, and we both experienced the same kind of suffocation that nothing was explicitly stated. It was implied. There's this constant undercurrent of resentment at yourself for not being brave enough, or at your family for not seeing the real you and forcing you into this box, and at your culture for these impossible standards. Now, for 50 years old, I've come to absolutely love my culture. I appreciate it. And there's also things that I violently rebuke when it comes to women and their roles. And I am comfortable saying those things out loud. When I was younger and actually voicing those within my family, I was viewed as the rebel, the troublemaker. You just need to be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. So there's confusion because you start to wonder, are these even my values or was it just what I was taught to believe? It's a lot of what happens once you enter perimenopause and if you're awakening and you're questioning these things. You're asking yourself, is this really mine? Or is this what I was meant to believe? And I've talked to other women, not just Indian women, who've gone through the same thing, whether it was religion and the rules that were in their house around shame and you don't do this because God will punish you. So it does happen cross culturally. I just can speak very detailed about it as it pertains to my culture. There's this deep, 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 bone deep exhaustion from constantly performing, always being on, from never just being allowed to be, to be. Now where you see in the New Age movement, everybody's talking about be, do, have. In my culture, it was do, have. There was no concept of be because that be was defined. And I'm redefining who I am in this time in my life. And I want you to understand this people pleasing, this need for approval, this fear of disappointing others, they're not personality flaws, not by any means. They're survival patterns that you've learned. You've learned them because at some point your belonging, your safety, your love depended on being the right kind of person. For me, the awakening started to come in my 20s. I still hadn't checked all the boxes. I was not married. I did not have kids, but it was still I had this plan that, yes, I was going to be married by this age and I was going to have this many children. I had already gone to college. I had already gone to grad school. Those boxes were checked. I thought, okay, I'm going to be the daughter they could brag about to their friends because my brother had already met those timelines. He was successful in his business, finished school, married, having kids. And here I was, and I wasn't there yet. And I felt like an absolute failure, even though I had a successful career as a speech therapist, even though I was making change in children's lives, in even adults' lives. I was miserable, but I didn't even know I was miserable. I had these moments where, I woke up feeling like I was living someone else's life, like I was an actress and I've been playing the same role for a long time. And I had forgotten until recently that there was a person underneath all the different characters, all the different characters that were developed to please others. The breaking point came when someone asked me, what do you want? What do you want? And I literally couldn't answer that. I knew my answer based on what would make my family happy, what would make my grandparents happy in India, what would be the right choice. But what I wanted, I had no clue. And that's when I realized I had spent so many years being who I was told to be that I actually didn't have any idea of who I was, who Priya was. And that's what I call the sacred breakdown. Others may call it the spiritual awakening. It can be called many things. And for me, it did coincide with perimenopause in retrospect. It's when those old ways of being stop working. When the good girl mask becomes too heavy to carry and you're just ready to take it off. When you can no longer ignore the voice inside of you that's saying, this isn't you, this isn't what you want. And this was a very traumatic time in my life because it coincided with the fact that I didn't have children yet, but yet I had told myself the story that I have always wanted children since I was 5. I knew since I was 5 that I had the twin gene and I was going to have them, yet it wasn't happening in my life. And that's a whole other episode about the grief that a woman has to go through when you haven't had children, but it's been part of your script your whole life. And it's something that is not talked about a lot. People just often dismiss it and often say, you're lucky you don't have children. You have all the time to yourself. It's not that simple, but that's another episode. Back to what I was talking about. Slowly, layer by layer, I started to uncover who I was underneath all that conditioning. And, there's a reason why I went into speech therapy, why I was helping others to find their voice. It's because I never had a voice, but it was easier for me to help others find their voice because there was that part of myself that wanted to speak. And I did it through every child I worked with. I did it through every adult I worked with. And back to the grief, it's not just grief about not having children, not having the marriage. It was grief about mourning the version of myself that I was leaving behind. There was fear. What if people don't like me? There was guilt. What if I'm betraying my culture, my family, everything that I was raised to honor? I remember visiting my grandmother, and I could never be good enough for her. And how many of us have dealt with the not being good enough in this journey in life? But nothing I could have done would have been good enough for her. Not making Indian coffee the right way, not being able to cook the way that everybody else in my family cooked, not speaking Tamil the right way, not speaking it fluently, and then just my physical appearance, which I couldn't change. The only way that I was going to change is if I grew my hair really long, parted it down the middle, braided it, and wore a bindi all the time and Indian clothes. Then I would have gotten approval. But because none of these boxes were checked, I constantly faced disapproval. Now I know in their own way, my grandparents loved me, especially with my grandmother. There was that I'm not good enough and that my cousins were better than me. So it never had anything to do with my degree, what I had accomplished in life. It was the fact that I was not Indian enough. Now, how many of you have faced that you're not anything enough within your culture? You're not a good enough this, you're not a good enough that. But through that grief, there was also this joy, this sense of I'm coming home to myself. I'm finding out who I am. I'm able to laugh. You're not going to tell me whether I can laugh or not. You're not going to dictate what I say yes to, what I say no to. You're not going to tell me to be quiet and be a good girl anymore. The irony in all of this and all this cultural programming is it didn't just happen behind closed doors in my Indian home or in other Indian homes or when I went to India to visit family. This happened in school. And in my school, there weren't that many Indian children in my school, but I remember it was maybe my senior year. And the cool thing to wear was overall shorts. And my parents got me overall shorts for my birthday. I was so excited to wear it. And so I had this tank top that I wore under the overall shorts and one of the overall sleeves or whatever you want to call it, you would wear it hanging off. That was the fashion. Everybody in my school was wearing that. And I remember walking into history class and the history teacher said, don't dress like that. You don't need to be a thug. And I'm thinking, a thug? I'm not trying to be a thug. I'm not trying to be anything. I'm trying to be me because I really love this outfit. So it was dictated from all different angles. And I want to go back to just a shout out to my parents. Like I said, they did the best they could given what they had been given, given what how they had been raised. And in comparison to the other siblings, aunts and uncles, yeah, they were a little bit more lenient about stuff. They did give me the flexibility after some time or the freedom to express myself through clothing. So I want to acknowledge that, yes, even though I was in India in my home, things started to lighten up with time, especially once I went off to college, especially once I was in a co-ed dorm and my new best friend was a boy. You know, they started to realize, okay, this isn't this isn't how life works. Once my mom, I kudos to my mom, she actually once we were all out of the house, I had moved away from home. My brother was married and out of the house. My dad was working away. And she started working. And I was always so proud of her for this. She started working and became, initially it was a teacher's aide in a Montessori classroom with no intention of pursuing that further. Then she became a head teacher. She went through the Montessori training and she was a teacher for 10 years and absolutely loved it with passion. It created a lot of resentment in me because I would hear her talking about these children and how we have to support their emotional needs. Or she'd talk about her colleagues and the issues they were facing with their boyfriends. And I'm thinking to myself, are you seriously talking about your friend who's my age and their boyfriend? Because this has never been allowed in our house. Or talking about emotional needs of children, this has never been allowed in my house. And I was angry. I was really angry for a while and resentful and quite snarky because I never received that. I had to dim my light. I had to dim who I was. I had to be the good Indian girl. It took some time. It took some therapy and it took some healing on my part, a lot of healing on my part, to realize, as I said, they did the best they could given what they had been given. And I'm grateful for the steps that they took to come out of their molds. They were essentially molded as well. They were living the mold and they didn't know that they could do things differently. So if you're watching this and thinking, oh my God, she's describing me, she's describing my life, she's describing how my house was, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're not selfish for wanting more. You're not betraying anyone by becoming you. That voice inside of you that questions these old patterns, that wonders who you would be if you weren't performing for approval, that voice isn't your enemy. It's a compass. It's literally bringing you home. And this doesn't happen to everyone. Some people stay in the mold for the rest of their lives and they're comfortable with it. And that's okay. And for some of us, we're given a real kick in the butt or a hit in the head to wake up and say, life is short. Start living your life. Start finding out who you are. Cultural conditioning is powerful because it's invisible. We think these limitations are just how things are, instead of recognizing them as choices that we can unmake. Now, maybe if I had that voice in me, maybe if I had that confidence, I would have been able to stand up for myself saying, no, this is not what I want. This is what I want to do. The conditioning started very early on, and it probably started even before I was 5 or 6. Talk about generational healing. As I step into this new version of myself, break down these barriers around women, marriage, and children, I'm also healing generations past, especially on the maternal line, because my grandmothers were married very early. They never even experienced childhood. And I don't know how far back that goes. So, just for some context, my maternal grandmother was married at 11. And you can say, oh, that's sick, that's disgusting. It's just what the culture dictated back then. And then she went and lived with her husband around 16. I heard rumors that my great grandmother, so her mother, was arranged to be married at 5. So we don't know how far back this went, but I just know that by me stepping into my true voice, by me being me, I am actually healing generations past, even my mother, and further back than I probably can even remember. So we're going to dive deeper into this in the next few episodes around culture. I want to stay on this because we're going to talk about how to honor your heritage while still maintaining or reclaiming your authentic voice. Like I said, I absolutely love my culture. If I see another Indian person, it's like a connection, an immediate connection, and I want to talk to them. But I'm not playing the role. So what I found once I moved here to New Mexico is that kept playing the role. So when I moved here, I was in my 30s, and there was an Indian community in this really small rural town, and I was blown away. Like, how can you have such a big Tamil community here in this town? And I got to know them, and I stopped being me and instead started playing the role of the good Indian girl, going to the religious ceremonies and pretending. If I had my tattoos and I was with these people, I covered up. I didn't want them to see it. As I started stepping into this new authentic version of myself, as I started finding my voice, I didn't care what they saw. I wore my Indian outfits and I showed my tattoos. Recently went to a wedding with my parents just this past March. I was wearing my Indian outfit and my tattoos. I wore a shawl because I thought, oh no, what are they going to say? There was that version of me that was coming back. By the end of the wedding on that Sunday, people were coming up to me, other Indian women saying, I absolutely love your tattoos. Oh my gosh, I love that. It looks so cool. I had a story that maybe I was going to be judged for it, misjudged for it. But meanwhile, other women were looking at it with admiration. So for this week, what I want you to do, as we've been talking about no, saying no to narcissists, understanding how to stay in your no and find your voice. Pay attention this week to moments when you start to edit yourself. When do you make yourself smaller? What triggers that people pleasing response? And that there's no judgment here. As I always say, awareness is key, and that's where the healing comes. So before I go, I'd love to hear from you. What's the one rule that you were taught growing up that still impacts how you show up today? Drop it in the comments. Let's start breaking the silence around these invisible chains that culture creates. So I love you. I see you, and I believe in your right to take up space in this world exactly as you are. Find out who you are. Define who you are. Your culture doesn't define you. And to that 7-year-old who was told she was too loud, baby, you were never too much. The world was just too small for your light. Grab the links in the description, www.unmutewithpriya.com. Grab my training, 4 steps to finding your voice in relationships. And for a limited time, apply for a free 20-minute coaching call with me. And if you'd like to be a part of my Paradise Within retreat, that's going to be held live in Gallup, New Mexico, September 26th through 28th. Fill out the application below and I will be in touch.